Welcome everyone to the Town Hall Forum. We're really honored to have a candidate for State Treasurer, Ronnie Chatterji, with us. My name is Adam Klein. I'm the Chief Strategist here at American Underground. And for those of you who don't know, the American Underground is a campus for entrepreneurs based primarily in downtown Durham. And our belief is that startups increase and diversify economic opportunity, but they require cultivation. It doesn't happen on its own, and that's the role that our team plays. We do that through space. We house nearly 300 startup companies. We've also got a dynamic and curated community, both a part of this space, but then also experts from around not only the the Triangle region, but also throughout the state. And then lastly, we provide high quality content that helps entrepreneurs drive their business forward. And it's with that in mind that we're honored to be joined by Ronnie, who is running for state treasurer, but also somebody that we've known for a bit of time in his role at Duke. He's on the Governor's Entrepreneurship Council, and very active in the entrepreneurial community. And so we're excited to be with you and to have this opportunity to engage with you. So let me give a quick background on Ronnie, and then we're going to jump right in and pepper him with all the questions we've got. So Ronnie Chatterji is an economist and is the Mark and Lisa Burgess Distinguished Professor at Duke University. His expertise is in business strategy, entrepreneurship, socially responsible investing, and the intersection of business and public policy. Ronnie served as a senior economist on the White House Council of Economic Advisors during the Obama administration, and he's also an appointed member of Governor Roy Cooper's Entrepreneurial Council. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley and his undergraduate degree in economics from Cornell. He's married to his wife, Neely, and they are proud residents of Durham, where they're raising their 3 kids. Ronnie, welcome. I'm curious, I also have 3 kids. How is it going raising 3 kids during COVID?
So the question, Adam, if you have 3 kids and I have 3 kids, who is taking care of the kids right now? This is the big question.
Yes.
With my wife, this is the balance that we're trying to achieve during COVID. My wife is an attorney at a tech company in Cary, and she's trying to balance her work and taking care of the kids when I'm on Zooms like this. And then when she gets on a client call, it's up to me to figure out how to entertain our 3 kids, 8, 6, and 3, for at least a half an hour before they break down this door to the home office. So the good news is, there's no long candidate speeches for me around North Carolina. Usually I give about 5 or 10 minutes, and then there's usually a little person in my lap. I will say, I have loved spending the time with them that I really didn't know if I was going to have during this period. Usually for a political campaign, and I did this in the primary, and some about it, you're on the road all the time. You're traveling to meet voters, and people want to see you. They invite you to every corner of North Carolina to talk about your ideas. And for me, that travel meant that I probably wasn't going to see my family nearly as much if we didn't end up with this, unprecedented pandemic. So what's happened is, we've been able to have dinner together a lot more as a family. We've been able to have lunch together when they're home. And we bonded a lot during this time. And so it's a very difficult time for so many people, but I think our family has been able to take advantage of spending that time together and really getting closer. And so I think I owe my wife a lot of credit for getting us all on the same page of how to manage the household during this time, all of us being at home. But I think all of us are benefiting from that extra time together. And I'm seeing that difference in the kids and our relationship every day.
Good. That's good to hear. Follow-up question to that. So, do you have a purchase you've made during COVID or something you've done with your kids, created with your kids, that's brought you all a lot of joy?
I'll give you one selfish one. I'll tell you one thing that we did with the kids, because, I just talked about the family, but there's also some selfishness, right? You got to go for a run once in a while to clear your head.
Yeah.
So I've been running a lot more recently, and people who know me know that I love to play basketball. I'm really a reluctant runner, but I do it to try to stay in some semblance of shape. So I've been running about 21 miles a week, which for me is a lot. I've only been able really to run 3 miles at a time for a long time. But I was carrying my phone and tried to listen to, really bad music, which, I would never share the playlist publicly because people would make fun of me, but listening to really bad music and holding this phone for 7 miles is a lot different than doing it for 2 or 3. So my wife got me one of those armbands, pretty cheap off Amazon. She always gets me the best deal. And now I can put my phone in that thing and I feel a lot more professional, and I can just have my hands free. And so that small tweak, something I never had to do because I wasn't that serious of a runner, really made my mornings, I one of those small things. I think it's great in life. You don't need to spend a lot of money to kind of brighten your day. And sometimes it's just that has made my runs great. So that's one thing. With the kids, we put up a yard guard underneath the basketball hoop. And that allows when, we inevitably miss some shots, okay? And it would usually roll down the hill in the back of our house.
Yeah.
Now that yard is catching things. So I think with some help from a friend, we put that up there. And that's been a really good purchase because the kids don't have to chase the ball down the hill anymore.
Nice. It's the little things, right?
It's
Makes
things.
life a little better. Good. Well, switching gears to the campaign. So we're recording this. Obviously, we're going to share it out throughout the AU and beyond. I think one thing that I personally have a question around, and I know many people who watch this are going to have a question around, is what exactly does a treasurer do? And so, a follow up maybe to that is what attracted you to run for treasurer? So maybe start with the first and we can jump in on the latter.
Sure. I mean, if you live in the Triangle, you might have seen our ads where we sort of made fun of this in the primary. We said, we asked people on the street, what does a treasurer do? And folks said funny things like guard the treasurer and all this other stuff. It really emphasizes, very few folks know what the treasurer does, and they're expected to vote for this statewide office. And we're on the ballot in every one of the 100 counties in North Carolina. But then when you talk to people about it, they really start to understand, oh my gosh, this is an important position. And that's why when I was encountered this office, when I moved to North Carolina, I started to realize, oh my gosh, not just is this the most important job that no one's ever heard of, it's one of the key state government jobs across the entire country. There's a couple of unique features I'll talk about that make the North Carolina State Treasurer position interesting and important, particularly for entrepreneurs. One is you're the sole trustee of our $100 billion public pension fund. Pension funds are the way that most people are saving their money, if you look at this across the world. A state employee, someone like my parents, would put a part of their salary into savings that gets matched by their employer, which in this case would be state government, and someone needs to invest that money. We got trillions of dollars around the world being invested in these pension funds. Well, North Carolina has its own, and the treasurer is the sole fiduciary, the sole trustee. In a lot of states like California, you might have heard of CalPERS, and a lot of our entrepreneurs and folks who scale companies know about the role of institutional investors like CalPERS in investing in private equity funds and venture capital. There you have a large number of people on a board who oversee the operations of CalPERS. In North Carolina, for whatever reason, it's one person who's the sole trustee. And that's the person you're going to vote for on November 3rd or vote early or absentee. And so, Adam, that is really what attracted me to this job. It's a job where you need to know economics and finance well. You need to understand the macro environment, but also how those investments result in small businesses and entrepreneurs growing and job creation. And as you know from my work at Duke, which we'll talk about later, this is what I've been studying for such a long time. So a treasurer is really the chief investment officer in many ways for North Carolina. The office, the department, is about 400 people, some dedicated to the pension fund. The second piece is the state health plan. So I know there's a lot of folks in the American Underground who are really interested in healthcare. I live in Durham, so I know what a big business healthcare is in Durham and North Carolina. Well, the state health plan is the largest payer of healthcare in North Carolina. So that means in every one of our 100 counties, for every one of our health systems, the state treasurer is responsible for paying those bills on behalf of our state employees. So someone like my parents, if they go to the hospital, that reimbursement is handled by the state treasurer. So when you're managing a large health plan for 720,000 members, you have a lot of decisions to make about how you're going to pay for healthcare and how you're going to make sure people get high quality service. And so that's another big responsibility of the state treasurer. The last piece, and I know people probably are bored by now, but I got to tell them because it matters, state and local bonds. Everything we build in North Carolina finance goes to the treasurer. People talk about infrastructure, connecting people and ideas. People think about school construction, 5G. All these pieces of infrastructure typically go through debt financing, and the treasurer has to oversee that as well. So put those things together. It is a job for a nerd, not a politician. That's why I ran. That's what attracted me to the job. I really felt like it was an opportunity for me to put what I know to work for North Carolina in one of those under the radar positions that most people aren't paying attention to, but we all depend on.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of your background that makes you qualified for this. I know just for the listeners, we sent a survey out to AU members and said, yeah, we're going to do this town hall with Ronnie. Send in your questions. What do you want to know? And so one of the questions that came surfaced to the top was, what makes you qualified for this? So I'd love for you, I gave your bio, would love for you to just dig in more on that of kind of your background and how you're thinking about this role as treasurer and what that would mean for the state.
Definitely. Well, I mean, first, to do this job, you need to understand economics and finance. And I've been, a professor at Duke for the last 14 years, have a PhD, worked as an economist at the White House for President Obama. That was a great experience, just being there in the aftermath of the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression. We might be in a similar situation now, depending on how you measure it. But up to that point, that was the biggest thing we'd ever faced. And so I've worked as an economist, both in terms of my roles in government, but also the work I've been doing in the academic sphere. And that gives me a good knowledge of how these systems work. I also have a background having worked in financial services, and I've also worked with lots of financial services organizations. And so many of my students have obviously gone on to work in financial services. So I understand the way the global finance works. These are prerequisites, I think, to understanding how to manage a $100 billion fund, particularly if you're doing it as a sole trustee. But you're going to need a good team to do that too. And in everything I've done, I've brought together teams. And the groups at American Underground that are starting companies know this, that entrepreneurship is a team sport. Well, so is running an agency like this or a department. And we need a new chief investment officer, a permanent person who lives and breathes the market to be managing our $100 billion. And we're going to need to build up teams to cover different parts of the portfolio. I mean, all these asset classes, real estate, for example, is very different than private equity and venture capital. You need a great team to do that. So my background is going to give me the insight to, I think, build that team effectively. I've also done a lot of work on healthcare. My dissertation was on the medical device industry. I've taught in health sector management program at the business school at Duke, Fuqua, and I've obviously sent a lot of students to go work in healthcare and understand the environment there. Running a state health plan requires that knowledge. I mean, as someone famously said, healthcare is pretty complicated, and so I think the knowledge of how the healthcare industry works is going to be invaluable. So I think those qualifications prepare me in a big way to do this job. And like I say, for folks thinking about voting, I mean, there are political jobs out there where you're giving speeches and trying to go viral on social media. If you ever read about me on the front page of the paper, I've done something terribly wrong. This is an under the radar position. But you need a nerd. You need someone who's going to get down into the numbers and figure things out and who understands the economy. You don't need someone grandstanding or trying to make a big deal of what they're doing. You just need someone who does the job right. And I think that being an outsider, someone who has not run for office before, being a wonk, a professor. I mean, look at my last name, it has like 15 letters. Very few people would say, this is the guy, to run for statewide office. But this job is a good fit for who I am, why I can do it.
Great, thank you. Another question that came from our community thought was really interesting to sort of flip this around. One of our founders was curious, what are the 2 or 3 things that we as the startup community, as founders, CEOs, can be doing to help you, assuming you win, do your role well?
Oh, that's a great question. So please pass on to whoever asked it. I appreciate it. Most people are obviously thinking about the questions they'll ask me on policy issues. They're not thinking about how they can help. And I do think that the state treasurer is the kind of job where I can bring together people all across the state to work towards a common goal. The great thing about this is there's not a single place in the state that I can't go and have the conversation I'm having with you right now. And being a business school professor and someone who understands economics and markets, we can talk about the state treasurer role even in a heavily partisan environment. Similarly, if you're founder CEOs, regardless if they're Republican or Democrat or independent, or aren't even interested in politics, I can definitely use their help. Here's a couple of things I would need. One is I want our entrepreneurial community in North Carolina to shine. If you think about the investments that you make as a state treasurer, you're often allocating to fund managers. When you think about venture capital funds or private equity funds, those are often located in different parts of the country or even globally. I want those managers who want to work with North Carolina to come to our state and meet our entrepreneurs and our innovators. And I want you to be on my radar so when they come, I can make those connections and introductions. If we're an LP in some of the most well-known venture capital firms in America, why shouldn't those firms be coming and meeting our great outdoor recreation companies in Asheville, our biotech companies in the East, and our amazing healthcare startups at the American Underground? I see no reason why those connections couldn't be made. So please help me know what the ecosystems are across different places in North Carolina, and I will connect you with some of the contacts we're making on behalf of North Carolina. That's the best way. The second thing you can do is help me think more about investing strategy and give me advice of where you see markets going. One thing I love about entrepreneurs is they're raising money and they're in the markets and they're thinking about the mega trends that are going to affect businesses like healthcare, infrastructure, and energy. Well, I need to think about that too at the top of a $100 billion fund when we're investing people's money. And so if you can continue to provide me information on how you're seeing the markets, and we can convene, we can get together on entrepreneurial councils like the one I'm on, that would be another way to really help me succeed as state treasurer. The last one, because they asked, there's so much emphasis on big companies and luring big companies with tax incentives in North Carolina. My approach to economic development focus a lot more on growing from the ground up. I think we should have a grassroots economic development strategy in North Carolina, and entrepreneurs are going to be the architects of that future. And so I'm going to need your help as part of that social movement to let people know in Raleigh that entrepreneurship is the future of the North Carolina economy. And for all the work we do, putting in corporate incentives for companies that already exist in other states and bid against other states to see who locates here, what if we took a small fraction of that money and invested in our homegrown talent? What could we do with that? So those are the three things I would love to get help from your founders and CEOs on.
That's great. Well, obviously I'll pass that along. I think on your last point, what's really interesting to me is, most of the economic literature points to the fact that these small startups will be the ones who lead us out of recessions, that, they're the job creators of the future. And so to your point, it makes sense that we as a state, if we're serious about life post-COVID, and there will be life post-COVID, that these startups are going to play a leading role in it. And so I certainly would welcome follow-on conversations with you after the election around what that could look like, policy frameworks that would support their growth, those kinds of things.
I would love it, Adam. And I think you're very deep on this. I'm sure there's other people in AU who are deep on this, but let's put a finer point on it. North Carolina can lead in the post-COVID era if we figure out a way to unlock the potential of our entrepreneurs and our innovators. And you're right, the economics literature, some of which I've contributed to, says that the job creation comes from new business starts. And so we got to be focused on that as much as we are trying to lure big companies to locate here. Both are good, but I just think that the scales are completely unbalanced. And we can do more in North Carolina, and I hope to be part of that solution on the Council of State.
That's great. Thank you. So switching over to your role at Duke at present and also the work you do in the entrepreneurial community, I'm curious how that work is shaping your thinking about this role as treasurer.
Definitely. So my research has all been about the entrepreneurial process and how entrepreneurs succeed. And so I love, interacting with entrepreneurs. And people in American Underground and around the state know that I love to ask questions of entrepreneurs, see how they're thinking about business strategy in particular. That bleeds into my teaching and my research. And I feel like being a part of the community as an academic has allowed me to learn just so much about the folks going through this. Being a candidate kind of feels like I'm on little startups, and I feel a little bit more, fellowship than I even did before. So my work on entrepreneurship has taught me that there's a lot of challenges in the entrepreneurial process where people get stuck, where folks with good ideas don't necessarily move forward because they don't have access to a mentor, they're not in the right ecosystem, they don't know the right questions to ask. And so, government isn't necessarily the answer to all those questions, but I wonder, in the spirit of your introduction about cultivating the environment, if the state treasurer's office, being such an important linchpin of economics and finance, can be part of that solution in helping folks connect with the resources, people, and ideas that'll help them move to the next stage of the entrepreneurial process. And I think that one of the reasons execution is so difficult for a lot of startups is because we don't always know what we don't know. And I think that I'd love to be a great partner from the state government perspective to help us in that endeavor. And that's something from my research directly. The second thing I'll say, a lot of my work has been on minority entrepreneurship. And I just think, and I know, Adam, you believe this to your bones, and everyone we work with does, but we got to get more people off the bench and get them into entrepreneurship and small business. And there are a lot of barriers to doing that. And Durham in particular, but other parts of North Carolina can be really successful in that effort. And so part of me thinks, man, how much untapped talent are we wasting not bringing more people into the entrepreneurial game? My research shows me the success that minority entrepreneurs can have when they're just given the same chance everyone else has. And I'm going to think about ways as state treasurer to incorporate those research insights into my work, whether it's plugging in minority entrepreneurs into supply chains, thinking about ways to design mentorship programs, and incentivizing students of diverse backgrounds to consider entrepreneurship. So those are probably the two big themes from my research that I really think I'd love to bring in to the state treasurer job.
That's great. And I'm thinking about your last point there, and Tom Rue, someone you and I both know at NC IDEA, just launched that foundation just launched the Black Entrepreneurship Council, which is really focused on grant making around supporting diverse ecosystems, diverse founders, Black founders in particular. And something Tom and I have talked about that I appreciate his sentiment on is, how can North Carolina be the leading state when it comes to support for Black, Latinx, female-founded companies? It's something we've been focused on at AU. It's encouraging to hear you think about that from kind of the statewide perspective, that we can do this in urban, rural, wherever across the state.
I love it. And one of the great things about state government is convening power. I'd love to bring Tom and you and others and connect with people who are working on similar efforts in Guilford County, in Buncombe County, right, and New Hanover County, where you have a lot of folks interested in these same issues. That's what we could do together. And again, government doesn't always have to take the lead on this. You can convene and let folks in the private sector and the social entrepreneurial sector craft solutions that then we can scale if they end up working. I think one key thing is convene, measure, evaluate, and scale. That's how I think about these things from the public-private partnership point of view, and I'd be so excited to engage. I mean, that's one of my most sort of things I look forward to if I was successful in this election, is to work on projects like this as a partner in state government.
So talk to us about if you are elected, what does a successful first term look like? You know, you're standing at the end of that and looking backwards. What do you feel like has happened?
The first thing that I think is really important is I need to get the Public Pension Fund North Carolina back on track. We're not following our investment policy right now, and I'm a person who really believes in setting a policy, executing against it, and also hiring great talent to help me. We don't have a permanent chief investment officer now, so we're really going to need to build up the team again, and we're also going to need to follow our investment policy. And that, it sounds in the weeds, but honestly, that's the key to a successful organization is people and process. And those are two things that we don't have going on as well as we could. So those are two things I want to look back at the end of 4 years and say, I brought back the team that can actually get the job done, and we have a process that we follow. The second thing I'd love to do is in the state health plan to align how we pay for healthcare with a 21st century model. Right now, just doubling down on the fee-for-service model. And so many other payers, insurers and others have moved on, and they're starting to pay for outcomes, which to me makes a lot more sense. You want to hold providers accountable, not just on cost, but for the outcomes of healthcare. So when I go to the hospital, that if I come back and I'm healthy and I don't have to go back, we're actually compensating providers for that. But we're also tracking to see when health outcomes are not being achieved, because it doesn't make any sense to keep paying for something that doesn't work. And that hasn't been put into our health system in the state health plan. And when I see $3.3 billion being spent every year without thinking about outcomes and quality, that's the kind of thing I want to attack as a state treasurer. So when I look back, if I can at least have aligned some of those billions of dollars with value-based outcomes, that will be a success. The final thing is I think we need to think about diversity and inclusion throughout the Department of State Treasurer, both in how we partner with managers and the investments we make, how we think about healthcare across North Carolina, and how we invest our infrastructure. I mean, so much infrastructure in this state, even some of the highways right here in Durham, as you know, they built in a way that divided neighborhoods and destroyed opportunity. When we build infrastructure in the future, we have to be conscious of not making the same mistakes that we made in the past. And so diversity and equity lens through everything we do will be another thing I want to look back in 4 years and see real progress against.
Great, thank you. At the beginning you'd mentioned bonds too. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Obviously, with where we are in the market, with what's happening with COVID, the bond market seems like it's a little fuzzy. It's a little unclear what the future is going to look like there. Can you talk a little bit about what the rating is like at the state level, how you feel like we're performing, any changes, if any, that you'd want to make on that side as well?
Yeah, we have a AAA bond rating. We've had one for a long time. I think that this is a good time for us to go to the bond markets in many ways, and there's some reluctance and maybe some disagreements about that. But my view is, North Carolina is lucky to be one of the states that's seeing people move here, and we're seeing net in-migration. And as you know, Adam, I mean, so many people want to move from other parts of the country to North Carolina for the same things that we love about living here. The outdoors, the quality of life, property values, the entrepreneurial opportunities. As people come in, we're going to need to build infrastructure to make sure we can move people and ideas at 21st century speed. And we need to connect our rural and urban areas as more people move further and further out, creating new community opportunities. And I think, at a time when infrastructure will probably be on the agenda at the federal level as well, North Carolina needs to take advantage of that and start thinking about building in a serious way. And I worry that right now we're kind of letting that opportunity go away due to politics, but there's so much we could do. The governor's proposed a bond that I support that will help in this effort. We got to be thinking about what transportation infrastructure in particular looks like in the next 20 years. And I think that Governor Cooper has a good vision for that, and the bond markets could be it'd be a really key resource in helping that happen right now.
Cool, thank you. So I'm going to give you one final lightning round question, a little bit off the sort of treasurer role. I'm curious if you could learn one personal skill, what would it be? You have a new hobby, new skill that you'd like to undertake. I heard you mention running, but anything else?
If I could sing a little bit better, it would be good for one in my house. I unfortunately like to sing, but I'm told I'm not a great singer. And again, I don't know if I believe the critics, but just to appease them, I think that if I can sing a little bit better, in the shower, at the dinner table, everywhere I sing, I think everyone would be a lot happier. So that's the skill that I have.
Nice. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Ronnie, I really appreciate you being with us. I'd love just for you to take a minute, address the entrepreneurs, not just at American Underground, but around the state with your closing thoughts, and we'll wrap there.
Awesome. And first, thanks for the opportunity, all the work you're doing to cultivate the ecosystems for entrepreneurs in North Carolina and beyond. for all the entrepreneurs, I mean, you are the architects of the future. My research, my teaching, my service to the state and the federal government has taught me that if we invest in you, you are going to create a future that's brighter for everybody across every sector. I can't think of a problem across any sector right now in the world, and particularly in the United States, that we don't have entrepreneurs working on, and that our best hopes lie with entrepreneurs. And so whether you're an entrepreneur now or you happen to go into it later, I want you to know that state government ought to be a partner. We got to understand why you're starting a business. We got to understand the challenges you face, and we have to be breaking down barriers, not creating them when it comes to entrepreneurs and innovators. And so I hope if I can be elected state treasurer, I can be the kind of chief economic officer for the state that will be an asset and a liability to our entrepreneurial community. I think my research, my teaching, my service on these entrepreneurial issues will be something that will allow me to help you in a way that really hasn't ever happened before. We've never had someone like me on the Council of State, a nerd who loves entrepreneurship. So I'd love your support. You can also check me out at ronniechatterji.com. If I am elected, I'd love to work with the community in my hometown, but also all the way across North Carolina.
Awesome. Ronnie Chatterji, candidate for state treasurer. Ronnie, thanks for being with us. For everybody who's tuned in, make sure you're paying attention to when you can vote. Early voting opens, absentee or mail-in voting as well, and then obviously voting on election day. Also would make the plug for the founders and leaders of their own startups who are tuned in. Ask your employees how they're voting. Make sure that they're not necessarily the candidate they're voting for, but how are they getting out and making sure they're casting a ballot. So let's be active in the political season. And Ronnie, once again, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.